Hello, and welcome back to What? Exploring Old English. I'm Marco.
And I'm Nat. Although you might hear it in my voice that I have a bit of a cold, it certainly hasn't impacted my enthusiasm in recording this episode. So today on What, we're back with the lionized Dr. Thomas Shippey. As you likely remember from our first episode with the man, Dr. Thomas Shippey is the apex of Old English philology, as well as the king of all things, JRR Tolkein.
Previously, we walked through Shippey's life story and into Old English higher education and networking.
Today, we'll delve into the present state of Old English scholarship, Dr. Shippey's research, and have a Q&A of miscellaneous medieval topics.
So sit back, pour yourself some tea, and get ready for a roller coaster of an episode.
After all we've learned in Shippey Part 1, let's jump into the current state of Old English scholarship.
I'll start off. Current state of Old English scholarship. Well, first, I'll just mention that there's quite a lot of activity among historians. For instance, there's a guy called Max Adams. He's written a book called The King in the North, which is about King Oswald of Northumbria. And I just got a book of his in proof. It's not been published yet. And you can see it's called The Mercian Chronicles. Well, that's kind of his little joke, because there ain't no Mercian Chronicles. And that's his point, really. For Northumbria, we have Bede's History of the English Church and People. And for Wessex, we have the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. But the big bit in the middle, not much information. So he's trying to sort of put that together. And I appreciate this, because I used to live at the heartland of Mercia myself and always felt we were being missed out. Tolkien thought the same, only much more powerfully. There's another author called Eleanor Parker, and she's written a book called Dragon Lords, which is about the accounts of the Vikings in Anglo-Saxon, or actually very often in Latin chronicles, but written by Anglo-Saxons. And she's written another one called Winters in the World, which is a study really of the Anglo-Saxon year. So Adams, Parker, there are obviously some other historians, but those are two that I have come across. However, that's history. And if we're interested in literature and language, well, the major work in 20th century scholarship is this one by Robert D. Falk of Indiana University. And as you can see, it's called A History of Old English Meter. And you can also see it's about 500 pages, and it's very difficult. Perhaps the critical observation that he makes is about, I should just say, it's a history of Old English meter, and the point of it is to try and establish a chronology by showing how linguistic changes affect or don't affect Old English poems. Well, Caluse's law. I've been looking for a simple explanation of that, and there isn't one. There are only just very long and complicated explanations. So I'll have a bash at saying it simply. In strict Old English meter, some syllables have to be short, and some syllables have to be long. Now, in the early years, the distinction between short and long syllables was quite distinct in the spoken language, but it faded. And the funny thing is this, Beowulf never puts a short syllable where it should be a long, and never puts a long syllable when it should be a short. How did he know when to use them? And the simple answer is he knew when to use them because people were still using them. They hadn't faded out yet. Now, I've got a quote which says more or less that. And it's in one of the important books, which is The Dating of Beowulf, which is Len Neidorf and me and Raphael Pasquale. And one of the contributors, he says, the Beowulf poet consistently observed distinctions of etymological length that were lost around 725 in Mercia for a simple reason. He composed before the pertinent desinenses, and that's a word you run into every day. He means word endings before the pertinent word endings became phonologically indistinct. So I think that's there's a counter argument to that, but I think that's the simple explanation. He recognized these distinctions because they were still there. Okay. I would actually give you another example of this, and this is me, not Falk. It's a funny thing that that Beowulf is the only written text we've got which actually gets the name of the Merovingian dynasty of France correct, philologically correct. All the others, hundreds of them, including all those used by modern historians, they're all wrong. R-O-N-G, wrong. Why is that? Well, I think the answer is, once again, he got the name right because people were still using it. And the Merovingian dynasty was deposed in 731. So it's, and I don't think memory of that, I don't think memory of the name lasted very long. I mean, people remembered there were Merovingians. They mentioned them all the time, but they didn't know what the name was. Now, the name was, how do we know what his name was? Well, Gregory of Tours gives the name of the founder of the dynasty as Merovejas. Merovejas. Well, the us is just, the Latin ending they tack onto things. And remember, this is important, the Latin alphabet has no letter for w. And you can tell it has no letter for w because when we print it nowadays, we print it as double V and we call it W, which it isn't. Oh, well, never mind. They hadn't got a letter for w. So his name was not, I think, Merovech. It was Merowech. One of the reasons for thinking that is that Vech doesn't mean anything in Frankish. People have tried to say, well, perhaps it's a mistake for Vecht or fight, but I don't think so because it doesn't say that. No, Wech. And what does the Beowulf poet say? Well, near the end of the poem, there's the guy who announces Beowulf's death says basically, and now we're for it. Everybody hates us. The Swedes are going to come and get us, and also the Franks don't like us. And what he actually says is, Uswas arsithan merowiungas milts unyivada. Ever since then, the milts, the mildness or the favor of the Merovingian has not been given to us. Okay, so the word is mera wio ingas, and it clearly didn't mean anything to the scribe, who got all the letters right but didn't know where the syllables ended. So we've got to be grateful to him for just copying what he saw in front of him, but he didn't know what it meant. No, of course he didn't. He was writing in the year 1000 when these guys were 250 years in the past. But mera wio, the poet obviously knew that mero in Frankish was mera in Old English, good, and he also knew that wech was wioch in Old English, and he knew what it meant. It means, a shrine, a sanctuary, something holy. And it's the same word, actually, etymologically, as the word for Christmas in German, Weihnacht, which means holy night. So his name was then, and also the wioch name element was common in Old English for kings like King Oswy. They sometimes write him as W-I-G, but it was really Oswioch. And he also knew that if you added ing onto the end of a name like that, you drop the ch. So he got it absolutely right. Mera wio ingus. So he. Meanwhile, all in all the Latin sources, they write meroving with a V, or they write sometimes merohing with a H. And if they were getting it right, they ought to write meroviching, but they never do. And in fact, they garble the word, the name, increasingly badly as time goes by. So, okay, same question, really. Why does the Beowulf poet get it right? I would say it's because that's what people were still calling him. And the next question is, how long did memory of the name last after the Merovingians were deposed and their successors, the Carolingians, were very keen on blotting memory out? damnatio memoriae, clearing out the memories. So, and I would think the answer is not long at all. So that, I suggest, gives Beowulf a date in the early 8th century. Well, that's the kind of conclusion which is drawn by Falk. But you will notice, well, no, you haven't noticed yet because I haven't said it yet, but there is a tension in the modern scholarship between philology and politics. And you might think, what's politics got to do with Beowulf? Well, quite a lot, and it always has, actually. Well, I'll explain that. Let's think. This volume I've waved already, The Dating of Beowulf. The subtitle is A Reassessment. And a reassessment means you got it wrong last time. R-O-N-G, wrong. That's my colleague Len Nydorf, who is more aggressive than I am, but there we are. And what he's saying really is that there was a famous conference and a famous volume based on the conference, which came out from Toronto. And this argued very strongly that Beowulf was a late production composed at about the time of the one manuscript, which is about the year 1000. And frankly, it was a fix. It was a fix. The Toronto people called in guys who they knew would sing to the party line, and they got a couple of guys who didn't sing to the party line, and they didn't publish their papers. So that made the whole thing look unanimous, but it wasn't. Well, Len and his colleagues, like me, decided to set the record straight, you might say, and so we put a collection of essays together, arguing for the early date. Now, what's this got to do with politics? Well, it goes back to philology in a way. Philology used to be called Die Deutsche Wissenschaft, the German science, and it was very strongly associated with the rise of German nationalism. And the person who was central to both the philology and the nationalism was Jakob Grimm. In the 1848 assembly to discuss the future of Germany, they had a table at one end for the officials. They had a semicircle of delegates from everywhere from Bavaria to Saxon-Anhalt. And in the middle, there was a kind of a corridor. And in the center of the corridor, there was one chair, and that was for Jakob Grimm, because he was the heart of the invention of Germany. Yeah, okay, jolly good, you might say. But, of course, German nationalism has become a trifle unpopular during the 20th century, especially in countries like, well, France and Belgium and the Netherlands and Italy. And they don't really like this story, you might say, of Germanic barbarians, taking over the whole of Europe, because it had just happened. And they didn't want it to look as if it was something that happened all the time. So they had to kind of recast history. And what they did really, this is what I would call the European Union view. There was no fall of Rome. There were no horrible German barbarians. There was just an evolution of political structures, which led to the foundation of kingdoms, and especially the Carolingian Empire, which looked very like the European Union. It was based in Aachen, and the European Union zigzags between Brussels and Strasbourg, either side of Aachen. And of course, the Carolingian Empire contained most of the European Union. So we got a a new view of European history, which is basically Carolingian. Charlemagne is the big hero, and the EU, in fact, awards the Charlemagne, the Prix Charlemagne every year for services to European unity. And one year it gave the prize to itself. What? Who spent it then? I don't know. All very strange. But this meant that, I've got a comment on this somewhere, if I can just find it. Yeah, this is another connected book, as you can see. This is Old English Philology, Studies in Honor of R.D. Falk. So you can see that we're sticking to the same line. And in that, my essay was called Beowulf Studies from Tolkien to Folk. And that's really been the story for a long time, for a long, long time. Most of my life, everybody followed Tolkien and said, oh, it's just a fantasy. Oh, there's no history in it. Oh, no, it's not serious. Oh, no, you don't need to know anything because it's just a fantasy. Yeah, well, who had the big personal interest in saying that fantasy was an acceptable literary form? Who was it? Who? Well, you can tell, can't you? Who'd been writing stories about trolls and dragons since, I don't know, 1916 without telling anybody? Yes, it was Tolkien, wasn't it? So he was really saying, look, the Beowulf poet writes fantasy, and so I can write fantasy too. Well, many people followed the party line on that because it's easy. You don't need to know anything. You certainly don't need to know anything about bloody meter or short and long syllables or any of that stuff. You can just make it up any way you like. And you can say it's symbolic or it's allegorical or it's, well, any critical trend can be bolted onto it. Yes. So what I said about the Toronto conference, which is trying to solidify this European Union view, is one might nevertheless wonder why a conference about the date of the poem's composition seemed a good idea. After all, if one was viewing it for itself as a work of art, did it matter when it was composed? It did if one had been paying attention to intellectual currents outside the limited field of Beowulf. Briefly, the Gibbonian view of post-Roman social collapse caused by Germanic invasions had become thoroughly uncongenial after World War II and had been increasingly replaced by the image of late antiquity, a process of social adaptation leading towards the united Europe glimpsed in the age of Charlemagne. So that was, that's politics. The date of Beowulf was affected by politics. And actually, this has been a bit of a subject since the very earliest years of Beowulf studies, because it's been fought over. People have been trying to claim possession of it in one way or another. Okay, well, that I think is one of the main developments in Old English scholarship. There's the attention to meter, there's the attention to Kaluza's law, and there's the conclusion that in fact it is, as we thought a long time ago, a work of the early 8th century which didn't get copied for 200 years. Well, and is it just a fantasy? Well, I can't deny it's got like a troll and a water hag and a dragon, and that's all pretty fantastic. I'll give you that. But surely it's obvious that the poem is kind of layered. It starts off with an introduction about Skjold and early Danish history. Then we have the fight with Grendel. Then we have a feast in which a story is told about Finnsburg in the past. Then we have the fight with with Grendel's mother. Then we have the switch to a much later period, and then we have the dragon fight, and then we have a kind of wind down. So depending on whether you count the bit in the middle as one bit or two, it's 7 or 8 pieces. But of those, only 3 are fights, the fantasy element. The others are full of historical information. And although Tolkien said, oh, well, we don't need to bother with that, he was kidding. He actually took it very seriously as history, but it suited his purposes to say it was fantasy at that time. And when he said later on, oh, yeah, well, it's really very historical as well, nobody took any notice. That's unfortunate. So anyway, I looked at this and I started looking at the archaeology of Denmark or you might say of southern Scandinavia in the early 6th century. We have, of course, got a date for the events of Beowulf, because when it starts, Beowulf's uncle Hygelac is still alive, and when it finishes, Hygelac is dead. And we know that he was killed raiding in the modern Netherlands. Well, the normal somewhere between 519 and 534, because those are the dates of the Frankish king who opposed him. And most people just split the difference and say, well, 519, 534, that's what's that? That's yeah, 525 will do as a date. But actually, I think it was a bit later. I think it was probably a bit later. There are some slight indications that way. And I must say, I wanted to argue that it was 530 because I could then connect it to the terrible disasters which overtook Scandinavia in the 530s, which was a real wipeout situation. So, when I wrote about Beowulf, the title of the book was Beowulf and the North Before the Vikings, and I think Beowulf gives you really a very good picture of the North before the Vikings, the time of the Danish expansion, and the time of the Jutish takeover, and of course also the time of the rise and fall of the Jetish kingdom. So it all fits together very well, and the poet wasn't trying to tell you. This is all, background. He mentions it because, well, it happened, and he knew about it. So no particular axe to grind, but that's just the way it was. Well, that I think I think all this is a move away from the Tolkien hegemony, I would say, in which everybody had to go along with the party line. And actually, one of the essays I've written is Beowulf studies from Tolkien to Falk, and actually, Falk really challenges the Tolkien attitude and the Toronto attitude, and he does it on the basis of philology. So we have the political angle by those trying to think of a word which isn't too impolite, those fancy pants in Toronto. And then there's the philological attitude expressed by sober and serious citizens like Falk and me and Nelson Goering and Len Neidorf, and our friends, really. Well, that's the way it's been going. I should say that when I used to go to Kalamazoo, I always tried to arrange a football match, and we always challenged the University of Toronto, and we always beat them, I may say. But that's partly because, with my fiendish cunning, I got our team to play in orange shirts, which meant that all the Dutch scholars would join us, and we had some very good ones playing for us as well. So we always beat them easily. So not only in scholarship, but in football, we are the champions. Well, I'm just wondering what I think one other book which I forgot to bring, but I'd mention is that Falk and his friend Christopher Kane have written a literary history of Old English, which we've never had before, because we couldn't have a literary history because we didn't know in what order things happened. Well, now I think if you want one survey, that's the one to have.
Wow. Just sort of wondering, as the time has gone on and Old English scholarship is constantly changing, how have you had to change as a teacher and researcher? Or do you think you haven't had to change at all?
Yeah, well, I have to say that at the start I didn't know anything, and I was pretty bad at everything. I was a very lowly kind of adjunct at Birmingham University, and they sent me out to give lectures. And since during my career at Cambridge, I had avoided lectures like the plague, I didn't quite know what you were supposed to do. So my lectures were terrible. They were rotten. But I learned from it. I mean, I know they were rotten because I heard the students saying so. And that was pretty galling. But I thought, yeah, well, they're right. And I've got to change. And the person who I took a lesson from was actually C.S. Lewis. I didn't go to many lectures at Cambridge because they were terrible, but I went to Lewis's and they were really good. And he taught me something about delivery, which was, you don't want to get your nose down and start reading your paper, which is very common. You got to stand up, you got to look at the audience, you got to judge their reactions, and you've got to really do it. Well, I used to go in with a card like that in the palm of my hand with, say, 6 major points to make. And that was all. So you got to have the spontaneity or else it doesn't work. So that was what I learned, in my early years. Um, when it comes to scholarship, I think one of the things that, again, helped me was that at Birmingham, they did a course on modern language, and I was recruited to teach it. But I didn't know diddly squat about modern English language. So I had to learn. And actually, I got quite good at it. But I think that's what every English course needs. Most of us. I'll ask you a question. How many tenses has the English verb got?
It's probably more than 3, but you're going to go with 9. I'm going to go with 7.
Okay. The answer is 2. There's present and past. All the others should be described differently. For instance, it's really 2 to the 4th. There's past or present, there's perfect or non-perfect, there's progressive or non-progressive, and there's active or passive. So if I was to say, I've been telling you this, I have been telling you, that's perfect, present, progressive, active. If I was to say, I had been telling you, then that would be the same thing, only past tense. Or if I was to say I had told you, then I've taken out the progressive element. But there are those 16 possibilities with every verb you use, and you always pick them. And you don't know you're doing it. And in addition to that, you can put a modal verb in front of the 16. So you can say, I could have been telling you, I would have told you, I must tell you. You can do that. There are a certain number of modal verbs. Perhaps I should just say that in my long career as a rugby player, 20 years or more, I was only sent off once. And that was for arguing with the referee about modal verbs. He said something like, you should do whatever it was I hadn't done. I said, oh, yes, it says you should, but it doesn't say you must. Off. And when this came up at the club didn't like players being sent off. There was a meeting, and they said, well, what's all this about? I said, well, you see, it's about modal verbs. And immediately there was a great cry from the committee, shut up, shut up, shut up. Don't let him start. Don't let him start. And so I was dismissed, fined a round of drinks all round, and told never to mention bloody modal verbs inside the clubhouse again, or any other verb come to that. So there we are. It's quite simple, It's very flexible, but it's not like what you're told in school. They say there's a conditional tense. No, there isn't. It's just you can put would in front of things. That's all. They say there's an imperative tense. No, there isn't. You can just put must in front of things. That's all. So all these things are quite easy to teach people because they're true and they know them. They got them in their heads, but we don't. So you get people talking about English grammar with vague memories of Latin, which doesn't help at all. Anyway, so that was another thing I learned. And actually, I think one of the breakthroughs which helped me in my first book was looking at adverbial clauses of time in Beowulf and noticing the rather odd feature in them, which was that you might say the natural way of telling a story is to say, this happened and people felt like that about it. But the poet never does that. He always tells you what the shock is, and then he tells you what happened. And that's a very powerful technique, which you can see several times. Actually, the one which is obvious is right at the end of the Grendel fight. It says, how shocked and horrified everybody was. What were they horrified about? When Beowulf put the arm down, because the poet has not yet told us that he tore the bloody arm off. So you keep information back to bounce it on people. And I said that was a very valid and useful poetic technique. And there were others like that. So I started applying syntax to literary criticism. And of course, the other thing was that you will find this hard to believe. Oh, dear me. But some of my colleagues, professors of Anglo-Saxon, cannot pick out a subjunctive from an indicative. No, I mean it. It's dreadful, isn't it? And so they don't know when the poet is making something subjunctive, and they don't know why. Well, that's grammar. Everybody should learn grammar, but you got to learn the right grammar. And the grammar that they teach in high schools and so on is all rubbish, absolute rubbish. So, and one of the reasons they teach it that way is there isn't a good textbook. You'd think, here, I'll tell you another thing. Surely the most unlikely event in the history of the world, well, the human history of the world, is the fact that English is currently the dominant world language. Why is that? If you were a Roman emperor, shall we say, about the year 100, and you called your wise men in and said, guys, I'm a bit worried. What do you think will be the big language in 2,000 years' time? Well, all the creeps would, of course, say, oh, Latin, emperor, certainly. The really educated ones might say, oh, well, I think Greek. Greek is what really educated people use. Perhaps one very clever one would say, well, I don't know, boss, but I've heard that far away to the east, there's a big wall. And on the other side of it, there's a lot of people, and perhaps their language will become dominant. They call themselves Chin or something like that. Well, yeah, no, but the answer was, it's the language of that little tribe there. Bede, when he talks about the invasion of England, said it was carried out by the Angles, Saxons, and Jutes. And he says, 3 of the most formidable tribes of the Germanic world. No, the Angles were so far down the bloody league table, you could hardly see them. The first mention of them is profoundly upsetting in a way. Tacitus, about the year 100, describing the German tribes, says, well, there's a group of 7 of them up in the north somewhere, and he lists them, and the Engler are the 3rd in this list. He says, well, nec quicquid notabile in singulis, there's nothing special about them individually. And actually, there's precious little special about them collectively, except they do have this horrible habit of drowning people in bogs. That's it. So you're saying to the Roman emperor, actually, it's that group there. If you can see them in your palantir, it's the ones covered in mud who've just come back from a drowning party. Well, their language will be the world language. How likely is that? It's ridiculous, isn't it? I can't even explain it myself. But there we are. We have English as a world language. And then Bede also says that England was invaded by the Angles, Saxons, and Jutes. Oh, yeah? I'm pretty doubtful about that, actually. This is partly because I myself, I'm an Anglo-Jute, and I don't think any of my ancestors so much as spoke to a bloody Saxon. They were all from Germany or somewhere. No, nothing to do with them. The ancient English, we know, came from the Angle, just like hobbits, actually. Do you remember that the hobbits came from the Angle? Well, Tolkien wrote that in as one of his little jokes. But the English came from the Angle between the Flensburg Fjord and the River Schlei. It's about the size of a modern county. And clearly they clearly did arrive in England. But we also have these kingdoms called Sussex, Wessex, Essex, Middlesex, and this suggests that these are in fact Saxon kingdoms. And I think Bede was probably thinking of that when he said, well, there's the Angles and the Saxons. But I'm not sure there were any Saxons. Saxon, the English, I may say, were just unknown before this period, but the Saxons were very familiar. In fact, the Romans had an official called the Comes Literis Saxonici, the Count of the Saxon Shore, whose job was to basically set up the signal stations, set up the defensive parties against the Saxons. So it became the habit among Celtic speakers to use the word Saxon for any Germanic person whatsoever. And they still do. What do the Scots call the English? Sassenach. What do the Welsh call the English? I think it's Saesneg. But Saxon is just a Celtic word for Englishman. So I think it's quite possible that when the English came in, the people they met called them Saxons, and they said, "Oh yeah, okay, we'll go along with that. Doesn't matter." But you notice they always call the language English. They never call it Saxish. Never ever. In fact, the word Saxish is never used in Old English. It's used as a suffix. So if you say Sooth Saxish, you mean someone from Sussex. But Saxish on its own, never. It's just not there. So one suspects that, well, there's something funny there, shall we say. I'd also say that King Alfred of Wessex, who was king of the West Saxons, all right, and whose mother was a Jute, all right, he claimed to be the natural head of all Anglekin, the Anglekin, the English kindred, the English race. So he thought he was an Angle, even though he was a Saxo-Jute. But somehow the Angles, I think, were the dominant group here. Well, the dominant group. But there's another funny thing. The Old English language is rather strange in some ways, and here's one of them. What is the Old English for I am? Ich am.
Yeah.
And then it goes, du art, he is. Now, these sound like Norse, because the Norse for I am is ek em, which is pretty much the same as English. But the German isn't. Actually, I've got a table somewhere. Let me see if I can find it. Yes, this is actually a book very rarely used because it's written by a Dane, Hans Frede Nielsen. And the question here is English a West Germanic language or a North Germanic language? Which you might say turns into politics. Are the English really Germans or really Scandinavians? Well, I put this once to Hans Frede Nielsen in a large public meeting in Denmark because I knew it would catch him on the hop. And I said, Hans Frede, you've done the work. Is English West Germanic or North Germanic? And he opened his mouth to reply, and I said, and I don't want one of your on the one hand, on the other hand replies. I want you to say West or North. And he kind of swallowed this, and then he said in a gloomy voice, it is West Germanic. And of course, all the Scandinavians booed, as I knew they would. But that's kind of right. But is it right? Here we are. Old English, ich am, du art, he is. Old Norse, ek em, can't read that, du est, du ert, han es. But Old High German, well, ich bin, du bist, ist. The paradigm, the Old English paradigm for to be is much more like the Old Norse one than the West Germanic one. But then, is there another paradigm in Old English for the verb to be? Yes, there is. And it's, of course, ich beo, du bist, he bith. And this survives in modern English as a saying I be. There's one funny bit when I remember someone using it. The England rugby team had a gigantic prop who was enormously strong called Vickery. And the funny thing about him was that although he was enormously strong, he'd never been in a gym in his life. And they said to him at one point, well, how do you keep fit in the summer, in the close season? And he said, he looked shocked and he said, in summer, I be working 14 hours a day on father's farm. And then he thought for a bit and he said, father says, I'd be cheaper to run than forklift truck. So you have, I be working and what was the other one? I be say, I be working. Father says, I be cheaper to run. So he says, I be. And that's still fairly common in my area in the Southwest. So we've got two paradigms. One is West Germanic, one is North Germanic. The one which has become dominant is the North Germanic one. Now, what does that tell us? There's other things like that. This is just a very obvious one. Well, the suggestion by Hans Freder is the home area of the English was the angle between the Flensburg Fjord and the Schlei, which at the moment is just on the German side of the German-Danish border. But the other side of the German-Danish border is Jutland, where the Jutes come from. And the suggestion is that, well, I think Hans says, the presence of both paradigms in Old English suggests that the Germanic settlers had links to both the north and the south in Germania prior to their invasion of Britain, which, you know, is pretty obvious in a way. The Anglo were a border people and were closely associated with the people on the other side of the border. So probably the Jutish element is stronger in the Anglo-Saxon makeup than the Saxon element, about which I'm still very doubtful. But you may not refuse to believe me because I am an Anglo-Jute and I can prove it. My grandfather was what was his name? My mother's family name is Kjeldgaard, which is Danish, and her grandfather came from Fjerritslev in North Jutland. So I have a strong Jutish element in me, and I don't like people to take it away. So Jutes rule, okay? Saxons down. This actually was a political element back in the 19th century. When Beowulf became embroiled in the Schleswig-Holstein question, which was caused, of course, the Prusso-Danish War of 1864. Well, I wrote something about that once, and I tell you what, I'll put it up on the Academia website, and I'll also put up Tolkien studies from Tolkien to Folk, so that you can read those freely. Is there anything else that would be useful? Oh, yeah. Well, I wrote a piece about names in Beowulf and Anglo-Saxon England. Actually, I wanted to call it onomastic redundancy in Beowulf, but the editor said, no, this is a Harvard publication. We can't have anything like that. So he relabeled it as names in Beowulf and Anglo-Saxon England. How boring. But the thing there that you might note is there's a website called Prosopography of Anglo-Saxon England, which just lists all the names we know. And that's really quite interesting to look at, because one of the things you find is that some of the names in Beowulf just don't occur in Anglo-Saxon England. And that's a very odd thing in itself, but they do occur in 6th century Scandinavia. So I think those are real names for real people. And they got remembered in England, but they didn't get remembered anywhere else. So, well, that's a theory too. Well, any questions at this point? I know I've been rattling on a bit.
So we love your work. We've scoured through a lot of your publications. Actually, here's our personal copy of Road to Middle Earth.
Yeah, that's right. Which is coming out, incidentally. I just heard today that HarperCollins are doing a kind of all Tolkien's works are being republished with kind of the same kind of cover. So they all look the same. And my Road to Middle Earth is tacked onto that as well. So I'm quite pleased about that, really. But it does need an update, you know, the Road to Middle Earth. I keep telling them that, but they don't want to do it.
Yeah, so especially we loved your publication, Listening to the Nightingale. I mean, it takes us through Old English into Middle English. It really analyzes this one, like, specific thing in all sorts of texts. So let's talk about it.
Yes. Well, I think what happened there was the general view of the poem The Owl and the Nightingale, which I may say was written a few miles down the road from me at Portisham, was that, well, it wasn't really about anything. It was, just chit chat. Well, academics sometimes like that kind of thing. It means they don't have to make their minds up. And I thought, no, this is obviously a debate about different attitudes to love. There's the sober, sagacious, prudish owl, and there's the flibbertigibbet, quite unreliable nightingale. Okay, so there's romantic love and there's kind of unromantic love, you might say. That's what it's about. And of course, one of my advantages, I think, was that I was quite happy to read foreign bloody languages. And, I picked out the Italian tale about, finding the nightingale, listening to the nightingale. In fact, I got the title from that. And there was the Lay of Marie de France, Le Lay de Laustic. And, and there was also some of the Latin stuff, like Philomela Praevia Temporis Amoini. So I just, brought all those in together and said, it's clear that the nightingale has a kind of amorous significance, and it still does, actually, in folk song. So I could even sing you one if I tried hard, I think. They both went... they both walked on till they came to a stream, and they sat down both together to hear the nightingale sing. And they said, yeah, anyway, when you sit down to hear the nightingale sing, that means that something's going to happen. It is a suggestive remark. It always has been. Say that I had an intention, actually, of going on from the owl and the nightingale to look at nightingales through the ages, right up to, I don't know, T.S. Eliot. The nightingales are singing near the convent of the Sacred Heart, and sang within the bloody wood when Agamemnon cried aloud, and let their liquid siftings fall to stain his stiff dishonored shroud. Yeah, well, what does that mean? I'm not quite sure, but if I'd worked at it, I could probably have got something out of that. And of course, there's the owl and the nightingale. There's the cuckoo and the nightingale. There's the thrush and the nightingale, which people don't take much notice of anymore. And of course, there's also the goldfinch and the nightingale. The poem isn't called that, but it ends up with a kind of debate between the goldfinch and the nightingale. So I thought there was room here for a study, really, of a bird lore in medieval poetry. But I suppose I got distracted and didn't get round to doing the other things, which is a pity, really. I recommend it to you if you feel like picking something up. Nightingale poems are jolly good, and lots of them too, in English, French, German, Italian, don't know what. Okay, that's one other thing is, of course, why did I write Listening to the Nightingale? Because I was a kind of adjunct. And quite early in my career, when I was still making a complete cock of all my lectures, my kindly, fatherly head of department came up to me and he put his arm around my shoulder. And you thought, Jesus, what's this? And he said, Tom, if you don't publish before your term of contract expires, there will be no place for you. I thought, okay, I get it. Scribble, 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 scribble. So I started trying to write things straight away. And in fact, beat the deadline just about. The first one that came out was Beowulf, the fairy tale structure of Beowulf, and the second one was Listening to the Nightingale in comparative literature. So those were the immediate reactions. So bear in mind that if your fatherly head of department comes up to you and puts his arm around your shoulder, this is when you've got to start running for the trees. Still, at least he gave me warning. So often, when you're looking at tenure track things in America, they decide your tenure after 6 years, but after 3 years, you have a kind of how are you getting on meeting. And I always told my head of a department, who is a nice, kind person, don't be nice and kind at this point. tell him what he's got to do, because it's not fair to leave him uncertain till 6 years, when if he loses his job, frankly, he's too old to get another one. So, as I say, I was fairly grateful to Professor Spencer for putting it straight to me.
I must mention, we did meet with Dr. Folk, and it was a great meeting. It was actually our first podcast episode, so we didn't really know what we were doing, but it was good. It was a fun time.
Yeah. Well, he is the man, really. He's the greatest philologist in the English-speaking world, and I don't know about Germany or Denmark, but he really is a worthy successor to all the old guys who are now mostly forgotten. There's still one or two young guys, though, who are still operating. But what upsets me is they don't seem able to find jobs in the English-speaking world. So Nelson Goering, who I always ask if I get stuck on anything, he's once again doing a postdoc in Belgium. He shouldn't be in Belgium. He should be at Harvard or Yale or somewhere. But the tide turned against philology quite a long time ago, and it's well, we're just trying, me and Len and a few others, to bring it back. And I think we've been quite successful so far. We certainly wiped the floor with those sods at Toronto. Sorry, I shouldn't have said that, but could I say one other thing, which is perhaps tactless, which is that you got to remember that the scars of World War II run very deep. And you have to consider what people have gone through. So, for instance, I know that Eric Stanley, who is professor of Anglo-Saxon at Oxford, his real name was Erich Steinler, and he was a German Jewish refugee who came to England. And so his views about German nationalists were very hostile, and there are others as well. The Netherlands government has just released a list of collaborators with the Nazis. And I know that actually in the Netherlands, it's usually remembered whether your family were collaborators or not. But now it's there in black and white. But quite a few professors of Anglo-Saxon were fired after the liberation because they had been too close to the Nazis for, I have to say, philological reasons. So you need to sometimes look at the background of people to see their personal motives. It's like Tolkien plugging fantasy. Why did he plug fantasy? Well, we know now. But that's the politics element. There's always politics in these things. And it goes back certainly to the 19th century.
Good question, Mark. Yeah. I'm kind of wondering about the downfall of philology. Like, this is what, I haven't been to a lot of meetings here, but I don't know. It's just very interesting how you said it just kind of like dissipated. And I'm wondering if it was ever really even popular in America at all.
Yeah. Well, you can see why it wasn't popular. It was very unpopular in England, actually. A very strong reaction against it. German stuff, they said, no, we don't want to know. It's difficult and it's unforgiving. The rules are very complicated. If you get them right, good. If you don't get them right, then it's no good at all. And that's not, in a way, what academics like. It's too severe. But I think it was a major, comparative philology was the major development in the humanities of the 19th century. And it also, of course, moved into politics because it created the rise of Germany, the rise of Italy, the unification of these countries, the separation of Belgium and the Netherlands, the separation of Britain and Ireland. All those were powered, I think, by philological considerations. Language was what defined nations, and if you couldn't figure that out, then you weren't a nation. And that sort of attitude is still kicking around, I think. Well, yeah, it's still quite powerful. And yet it was also a kind of insight into history. I've been looking actually at the history of Native Americans. And of course, there ain't no history of Native Americans because they didn't write. Ah, yes. But they all have languages, and the language connections can be studied. And so you can work out, for instance, that the Comanche are a split off from the Shoshones, who are also related to the Utes of Utah. And they are clearly a people who came down from the Rocky Mountains and discovered horses. And there, you can work things like that out by studying the relationship between the languages. Now that's philology, and I may say, Native American philology. Gosh, that's difficult. Germanic philology is much easier because there are not so many languages. But I think one of the problems has been there is no textbook for it. I'm involved with Uppsala Books, and I keep saying, look, what we ought to do is get someone to write a handbook of Proto-Germanic, a grammar of Proto-Germanic, because you can work it out in bits and pieces, but I'd like to have it all set out fair and square with no contradictions, as Tolkien says about hobbits. That's what I like about books. Gives you the data, but who's going to do it? Well, not me. I'm not good enough. I'm going to try and work on Nelson Goering and see if I can get him to do it, because he's the only person I know of apart from Falk who could. But that's the problem, really. It's dropped out of the syllabus, and that I think has had serious disadvantages.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Dr. Shippey. We've covered a ton. Is there anything else important that we haven't touched upon that you'd like to express?
Yeah, I just thinking. I seem to have spent my life moving from one university to another under a cloud of disgrace and scandal. This is so unfortunate. It's all lies. It was somebody else's fault. I wasn't there. But I don't know. At Oxford, for instance, I was actually tried by a tribunal of all the senior tutors of all the Oxford colleges on a charge of procedural irregularity and found guilty. Yes. Well, perhaps I've told you this before. As they pronounced me guilty, I was looking at them and I was thinking, all these old reptiles, around the bloody table. If I had an axe, I'd come over this table and kill the bloody lot of you. And I think they noticed. Anyway, so that was that. Oxford, Leeds, of course, yes. Leeds, my honest colleagues in the Department of English signed a round robin letter, all of them, to get rid of me. They said, we can't stand having him as chair because he does not allow discussion. That's right. I don't allow discussion. Everybody do what I say. That's the plan here, because none of you can make your bloody minds up about anything. Yes. Well, apparently that was not the attitude required. But then I'd been brought into Leeds to sort out a moribund department. What I had forgotten, or they never told me, my real job was to revive a moribund department without hurting anyone's feelings. And that was the bit I was no good at. Still, oh well, there you go. On the other hand, St. Louis were very nice to me when I left and gave me a kind of memorial book and things like that. So I remember St. Louis with more affection. Why? I guess I am peremptory. But I was born in India and I was brought up in a kind of imperial surroundings, and I was imbued with the kind of old sayings, the only wrong decision is no decision. You must decide. If there is trouble of any kind, make your way to the scene of trouble as fast as possible, and then walk in slowly. It was all about never give an order which you know will be disobeyed. If you do give an order and it is disobeyed, strike at once. So all this kind of thing is absolutely no bloody use in the academic world, is it? Where the academic world doesn't believe in decisions. It believes in subcommittees. Form a subcommittee, have a report, push the whole thing off till next year, and perhaps we'll have some more funding then. I'm afraid I never quite managed to fit into that. And it's probably a good job I'm not in academia anymore. I think I'd get kicked out for saying the wrong thing. After all, nowadays, as far as I can see, in American academia, anything can be considered offensive. I don't even know what is offensive, but I've no doubt I would say it without thinking. So there you go. I don't know how we're going to get on with that. Have I said anything offensive this time? Bloody Saxons, yes, okay, yes, I admit that. Those sods at Toronto, yes, well, I suppose so. Every now and then these things slip out.
Well, that's all right.
Yeah.
Does anybody else have anything notable there?
Yeah, you know what? I do have a question. So to kind of bring us back to philology here. So you've described how it's shaped our understanding of history. What do you think, some of the possible consequences will be in the future of philology lists world? Kind of on the decline, you've said. Losing that tool, how will it shape our understanding of history? What negative consequences will come with it?
Well, I think one result is you lose a sense of deep time, because philology takes you back thousands of years to a time when everything was different, and if you lose that, well, it perhaps makes you overconfident. You think things are going to stay like this. It's all going to be like it is now. There isn't going to be any change, but there are changes going on. It's just they move rather slowly, but not so slowly that I don't notice them, because I'm 80 years old and I can see changes in the language coming along, and these are going to continue. And people get very annoyed about them and very angry about them and say, we've got to kind of purify the language. No, you don't need to. The language will look after its bloody self. But the level of linguistic knowledge, among our upper classes, our educated classes, is very, very poor. They don't understand it at all well. And one bad effect of that, of course, is nearly everybody I meet is a monoglot. They can't speak any other languages. They've never tried. They don't really believe in other languages. That's not a good basis. I'm not a brilliant linguist, but I can read pretty much any European language. Read, not necessarily talk, because I kind of know how they develop, and that I think would be a great help, instead of assuming that everybody will talk English in future. Perhaps they will. Perhaps it'll be some other little group that no one's noticed, distinguished only by the habit of drowning people in bogs, and that they will somehow be the future. Well, my other great affection, of course, is for science fiction, and science fiction gets you to think about things like that. Things are going to change. Yes, I think we all need to be more aware of that.
So the lack of the study of linguistics basically correlates with people are not learning languages. Yes,
well, that's it's sad, because it's quite unnecessary. People often say, "Oh, well, English people aren't good at learning languages." My mother was bilingual in Hindi. My father spoke Pushtu, which is, the language of the bad guys up in Afghanistan. with whom he was very friendly, I'm sorry to say. And my first language was Nepali. Um, yeah, you can learn languages quite easily, and it's a good idea. It gives you a different perspective. That's all I can say. And I think I even think there's something to be said for learning Latin. I started Latin at the age of 7, and it was all the mensa, mensa, mensam, mensai, mensai, mensa stuff, and I did all that. But I wish I'd got better at it in a way. I never progressed very much because they didn't teach me the syntax. They just taught me the morphology, as they call it. It was a morphocentric education. Still, just the same. If you read Latin, there's a lot of things you can read which you couldn't read otherwise. This is the latest production of Uppsala books. Waltarius, the Latin epic of Walter of Aquitaine. It's a long poem. It's clearly related to the Old English fragments of Waldera, and there was clearly an Old English epic like this epic, but unfortunately it doesn't survive. But we have got an analog for it, and indeed quite a lot of other analogs. But Latin is a very useful language. It's still in a way being used. Language teaching is always a good idea, and language learning is always a good idea. And it's just a case of allowing the time and resources to do it. And I sometimes feel ashamed when I go on the continent and find everybody talking English to me, because they're much better at it than I am, and they're much better at it than I am at their languages. And I don't think that's right. I should be better than them at everything, because that's the way it is. I'll just have to keep trying, I guess.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, this has just been an incredible opportunity.
And now we can share with the world 2 hours of your life, of our discovery, and we're just so happy to do it. Thanks so much.
Keep in touch, guys, and my congratulations, actually, on your initiative. It's very good to have an Old English Club.
Bye, Dr. Shippey. Thanks, everybody, for listening.
Man, what a guy.
He is something. We are so grateful to have had this opportunity to meet for over 2 hours with Dr. Shippey.
I don't know if we're going to include this in the final cut, but he did mention that, like, if we have any questions, just reach out to him. He's fantastic with his email. So any questions after you've left us a 5-star review, of course, put them in the comments section and we will redirect it to him. So thanks for listening. See you soon.
But for now,
Where's Hal?